I was standing in the doorway of Ink. Brew on State Street, frozen with embarrassment and panic, watching the owner, a man I'd seen countless times but never actually spoken to, sitting at the corner table with my leather journal open in front of him, reading my most private thoughts like they were the morning newspaper. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched his dark eyes move across pages filled with terrible poetry, stream of consciousness rants about my quarter-life crisis, and mortifyingly honest confessions about feeling lost in a city of 8 million people. When he looked up and saw me standing there, his expression wasn't what I'd expected. Instead of embarrassment or the polite discomfort of someone who'd accidentally invaded another person's privacy, there was something that looked almost like recognition in his eyes. Like he'd been waiting for me to come back, like those pages contained something he'd been searching for without knowing it. "You left this yesterday," he said, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "I was hoping you'd come back for it." If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow. "You read it," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I'd intended. It wasn't a question I could see from the way the journal lay open, from the careful way he was looking at me, that he'd done more than just flip through to find my contact information. I did. He closed the journal gently, but didn't hand it back to me. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have, but..." "But what?" I stepped into the coffee shop, letting the door close behind me even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The late afternoon crowd had thinned out, leaving just a few laptop-wielding customers scattered throughout the warm, book-lined space. But I recognized something in your writing, something I thought I was the only person who felt. I stared at him. This man I'd observed from a distance for months without ever working up the courage to do more than order coffee and mumble thank you. He was older than I'd initially thought, probably mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of lived-in face that suggested he'd experienced more than his share of life's complications. There was something about the way he held himself, the careful set of his shoulders, that made me think he was used to carrying other people's secrets. "What's your name?" I asked, realizing I'd been coming to his coffee shop for 6 months without ever learning it. "Marcus. Marcus Webb." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Will you sit, please?" "Why should I? You violated my privacy. You had no right to read my journal." "You're absolutely right. I didn't." His voice was quiet, sincere. "But Elena, I need to show you something." My blood went cold. "How do you know my name?" "It's written on the first page, along with your phone number, which I should have used instead of." He gestured helplessly at the journal. "Instead of this." I remained standing, arms crossed, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "What do you need to show me?" Marcus stood up and walked behind the counter, returning with a weathered notebook that looked like it had been handled countless times. "This." He opened it to a page marked with a faded receipt and set it on the table beside my journal. I couldn't help but lean forward to read what he was showing me. And when I did, my breath caught in my throat. The words on the page were mine. Not exactly, the handwriting was different, more masculine. The ink faded with age. But the sentiment, the imagery, even some of the specific phrases were so similar to a poem I'd written just last week that it felt like looking at my own thoughts reflected back at me from 20 years in the past. "When did you write this?" I whispered. 1998. I was 24, working at a bookstore in Lincoln Park, convinced I was going to be the next great American poet. His smile was self-deprecating. Obviously, that didn't work out. "This is." I picked up his notebook, reading the poem more carefully. It was about urban loneliness, about feeling invisible in a crowd, about the weight of unfulfilled dreams. The themes were universal enough, but the specific details, the way he described the sound of rain on coffee shop windows, the metaphor comparing strangers to unread books, were eerily similar to things I'd written. "Impossible," I finished. "That's what I thought when I read your poem, the one on page 47. I felt heat creep up my neck. Page 47 was where I'd written about feeling like a ghost in my own life, about watching other people live with purpose while I drifted through my days like smoke. It was some of my most personal writing, the kind of raw honesty I'd never shown anyone. "You think I plagiarized you?" "No," Marcus sat back down, his dark eyes intense. "I think we're the same kind of person, the kind who sees things other people miss, who feels things other people skim over. The kind who writes because not writing would be like not breathing. You don't know anything about me, don't I? Elena Rodriguez, 25 years old, works at the Art Institute doing visitor services because it pays the bills but dreams of being a writer. Lives alone in a studio apartment in Pilsen, drinks too much coffee, reads everything she can get her hands on but never thinks her own writing is good enough to share. I stared at him, shocked by how accurately he'd read my life from a few journal entries. Because I was you, 20 years ago. Different details, same story. He leaned forward in his chair. Elena, when I read your writing, it was like finding a letter I'd written to myself and forgotten. That's really intense for a conversation with someone whose privacy you violated. I know, and I'm sorry, but I had to know, are you planning to do anything with your writing? Because you should. You have something real there. I finally sat down, clutching my journal like a lifeline. Why does it matter to you what I do with my writing? Because 20 years ago, someone should have told me what I'm telling you now. That talent like yours doesn't come along often, and wasting it is a tragedy. What happened to your writing? Marcus's expression grew distant. Life, rent, the crushing realization that poetry doesn't pay student loans. He gestured around the coffee shop. I bought this place 15 years ago, told myself it was temporary, that I'd save up money and go back to writing when I had financial security. And did you go back to writing? Some, but not seriously. Not the way I should have. He looked at me directly. Elena, I don't want to watch someone else make the same mistake I did. So, what are you suggesting? That you let me help you. I still have connections in the literary world, editors, publishers, people who know good writing when they see it. Your work deserves to be read. I studied his face, looking for signs that this was some elaborate pickup line or that he had ulterior motives I couldn't see. But all I found was sincerity and something that looked like hope. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. Because your writing moved me in a way nothing has in years. Because I see myself in your words, and maybe helping you succeed is a way of giving my younger self the encouragement I never got. And what do you want in return? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I want to know you, the person behind those words. I want to understand how someone your age can write with such depth, such understanding of loneliness and hope and the weight of dreams deferred. What would you do if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments. The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was brave enough to cross. Here was a man offering me exactly what I'd been hoping for: recognition, validation, connections in the literary world. But he was also a stranger who'd invaded my privacy, who was old enough to be my father, who was looking at me with an intensity that suggested his interest wasn't purely professional. Marcus, I said carefully, this is really complicated. Most worthwhile things are. You're twice my age. 19 years. But who's counting? You read my journal without permission. And I apologized for that multiple times. You could be a serial killer. I could be, but I'm not. I'm just a guy who owns a coffee shop and writes bad poetry in his spare time and hasn't felt this connected to another person's words in 20 years. I looked around the coffee shop, taking in the carefully curated book collection, the artwork from local artists, the way the afternoon light fell through the windows. It felt like a place where stories lived, where words mattered. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Coffee, tomorrow, a real conversation where we both know what we're getting into. His smile was tentative, hopeful. And maybe you let me introduce you to some people who could help your career. Just coffee? Just coffee. Unless you want it to be more than coffee. And if I say no? Then you take your journal and leave, and I promise never to bother you again. But Elena, I hope you don't say no. I stood up, journal clutched against my chest, and walked to the window overlooking State Street. Outside, people hurried past on their way to somewhere important, all of them carrying their own private stories, their own secret dreams and disappointments. Can I ask you something? I said without turning around. Anything. What's the real reason you want to help me? The truth, not the noble answer about encouraging young writers. Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was rough with honesty. Because reading your writing made me feel less alone for the first time in years, because you see the world the way I see it, but with hope I lost somewhere along the way. Because. He paused. Because I'm attracted to your mind in a way that has nothing to do with age or appropriateness and everything to do with recognition. I turned back to face him. Recognition? Like finding the other half of a conversation I've been having with myself for 20 years. The honesty in his voice made something flutter in my chest. Marcus, I don't know how to do this, whatever this is. Neither do I, but I know I don't want to let you walk out of here without at least trying to find out what this could be. I looked at him sitting there with his notebook full of 20-year-old dreams, offering me connections I'd never thought I'd have access to, looking at me like I was worth taking a risk on. One coffee, I said finally. One coffee. And you introduce me to these literary connections regardless of whether anything personal happens between us. Absolutely. And if it gets weird or complicated or I decide this was a mistake, then you walk away, no questions asked, no hard feelings. I sat back down and opened my journal to the page he'd mentioned, reading my own words with new eyes. You really think this is good? I think it's extraordinary. And I think you're about to discover that there are people in this world who've been waiting to read exactly what you have to say. The next day, Marcus and I met at a different coffee shop neutral territory, he said, so I wouldn't feel trapped in his space. We talked for 3 hours about books and writing and the weight of carrying stories inside you that no one else understands. He showed me more of his old poetry, and I shared pieces from my journal that I'd never read aloud to anyone. You stopped writing seriously after you bought the shop? I asked as we walked along the lakefront afterward, the conversation having moved naturally from coffee to an extended exploration of each other's histories. I told myself I stopped, but really, I just started writing different things. Business plans instead of poems. Grocery lists instead of observations about human nature. I convinced myself that practical writing was more mature than creative writing. Do you regret it? Every day, but Elena, meeting you. It's making me want to write again. Really write, not just scribble thoughts in margins. Then you should. Start again, I mean. Maybe we could start again together. Writing group of 2, critique partners, accountability buddies. Is that what this is? A professional collaboration? Marcus stopped walking and turned to face me. Do you want it to be just professional? I don't know. This is all happening really fast, and I'm not sure I trust my judgment when it comes to older men who seem too good to be true. What would help you trust your judgment? Time, honesty, proof that you're interested in my mind as much as anything else. Have you ever had someone believe in your talents more than you believed in yourself? Share your story in the comments. 6 months later, I'm writing this from the corner table at Ink Brew, where Marcus first found my journal. My first collection of poetry comes out next month with a small but respected literary press-own of the connections Marcus introduced me to, who believed in my work as much as he did. We've been writing together every morning before the shop opens, pushing each other to be braver, more honest, more willing to put our truths on the page. The personal side of our relationship took longer to develop than either of us expected, but maybe that was what made it work. We spent months building trust through shared words before we ever shared anything else. And when we finally did cross that line from writing partners to something more, it felt like the most natural progression in the world. If stories about unexpected connections inspire you, make sure you're subscribed. I share one real story every single day, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.